Hello, this is Rabbi David Abramson. This week's Torah portion is Parashat B'ha'alot'kha. I want to share with you a story from this week's parasha, which has a number of lessons to teach us. It can be found in Numbers chapter 11. As the story begins, the Israelites are complaining again. Zacharnu et hadaga asher nochal b'Mitzrayim chinam. We remember the fish that we used to eat in Egypt. Et hakishuim, the et ha'avatichim, the et hachatzir, the et habetzalim, the et hashumim. The cucumbers and the melons, the leeks, the onions and the garlic. The ata nafshenu yivesha, ein kol bilti el haman einenu. Now our gullets are shriveled. There is nothing at all, nothing but this manna to look to. This is not the first time that the Israelites have tried Moses' patience and God's patience. This time, Moses is having a particularly difficult time. Vayomer Moshe el Adonai, Moses said to Adonai, Lama hare'ota la'avdecha, why have you dealt badly with your servant? V'lama lo matzati chen be'einecha, why have I not found favor in your eyes? Lasum et masa kol ha'am hazeh alai, to lay the burden of this people on me. Lo uchal anochi levadi laseit et kol ha'am hazeh, I am not able to bear the burden of this whole nation by myself. Ki chaved mimeni, it is too heavy for me. V'im kacha at oseli, and if this is the way you're going to treat me, horgeni na harog, then just kill me. V'al ereb bera'ati, so I won't have to look upon my wretchedness. By the way, the main topic of this chapter is the Israelites clamoring for meat and God's angry response. But I want to concentrate on what at first glance might seem to be a secondary part of the story, Moses' crisis of leadership. This crisis is major. Moses is so pained by his burdens that he'd rather die than continue in his wretchedness. The good news is that God has a solution to Moses' problem, but it will come at a cost. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe. Then Adonai said to Moses, Esfeli shiv'im ish miziknei Yisrael. Gather for me 70 of Israel's elders, asher yadata ki heim ziknei ha'am v'shotarav, whom you know as elders and officers of the people. V'lakachta otam el ohel moed, and bring them to the tent of meeting, v'hityatzavu sham imach, and let them take their place there with you. V'yaradati v'dibarti imcha sham, I will come down and speak with you there. Va'atzalti min haruach asher alecha, and I will draw upon the spirit that is on you, Moses, v'samti alehem, and put it upon them. V'nasa'u itecha b'masa ha'am, they shall share the burden of the people with you, v'lo tisa ata levadecha, and you shall not bear it alone. And now a few verses later, Vayered Adonai be'anan vayedaber elav, then Adonai came down in a cloud and spoke to him. Vayatzel min haruach asher alav, God drew upon the spirit that was on Moses, Vaytein al shiv'im ish hazakenim, and put it upon the 70 elders. Vayhi kenoach alehem haruach, and when the spirit rested upon them, vayit naba'u, they spoke in ecstasy, v'lo yasafu, but did not continue. This word vayit naba'u is sometimes translated as they prophesied. If you read Hebrew, and if the text is large enough and clear enough on your screen, you can see the verb root nun bet aleph, which is also the root of the Hebrew word navi, prophet. Hence, vayit naba'u, they prophesied. But that's not what's going on in this verse. God's Spirit will guide them when they assume their tasks as elders in the community. In a sense, that's what prophecy is. But a better translation than prophesy is the somewhat obscure spoke in ecstasy. We usually associate the word ecstasy with great joy or great pleasure, That's one of its modern meanings. But I remember learning in an ancient Greek philosophy class in college that the word ecstasy comes from the Latin ekstasis, out of self. In ancient religions, and in some modern religions as well, ecstasy is an experience of transcending oneself in achieving a higher spiritual status. Sometimes this involves trances or other dramatic states of consciousness, but perhaps in other cases, this simply involves a state of greater spiritual intensity. And so in our story, the temporary state of spiritual intensity was part of one's becoming an elder. In the case of the 70 elders, Vayitnaba'u, they achieved this temporary state of spiritual intensity, velo yasafu, but they did not continue in this spiritually intense state. And that's a nice ending to this part of the story. God gives Moses the assistance that he needs in leading the Israelites, and the elders achieve their elevated status through a transitory experience of spiritual intensity. But remember that I said that this would come at a cost to Moses. Moses is now going to have to learn how to share leadership, how to share power. His leadership of the Israelites has had its difficult moments, to be sure, but it's had its glorious moments as well. After all, Moses did lead the Israelites out of Egyptian bondage. He did bring them to Mount Sinai, and he has led them in their difficult journey to really becoming the people of Israel. And this new power-sharing arrangement is going to require some patience and humility from Moses. And that patience and humility are about to be tested. Now verse 26. Vayisharu shnei anashim b'machaneh. 2 men had remained in the camp. Shem ha'echad Eldad v'shem ha'sheni Medad. One named Eldad and one named Medad. V'tanach alehem haruach. Yet the Spirit rested upon them. V'hema b'ketuvim. They were among those recorded, v'lo yatzeu ha'ohela, but they had not gone out to the tent, vayitnaba'u b'machaneh, and they spoke in ecstasy in the camp. These verses are very ambiguous and leave some unanswered questions. Who are Eldad and Medad? What does it mean that they were among the recorded? Were they designated as elders or not? And what does it mean that they had not gone out to the tent? They had not come to the ceremony at the Ohel Moed at which the 70 elders were designated. So I guess that means that they weren't elders. But then, Vayitnaba'u b'machaneh, they spoke in ecstasy in the camp. They achieved the spiritual intensity that the elders had received. So maybe they were elders after all. Or maybe they were unauthorized elders, somehow stealing a bit of the divine spirit for their own spiritual intensity. Well, the word came back to Moses, and this time it was Joshua, Moses' assistant and future successor, who was furious. And this time it was Moses who talked Joshua down from his anger. Verse 29, Vayomer lo Moshe, Moses said to Joshua, Hamakane atali, are you jealous for my sake? Umi yitain kol am Adonai nevi'im. Would that all of Adonai's people were prophets. Ki yitain Adonai et rucho alehem, as Adonai has placed the divine spirit in them. What a beautiful response this is. Moses has risen to the occasion. He's shown that he's able to share leadership with the 70 officially sanctioned elders, and also that he's able to accept the spiritual intensity of other people whom God decides to grace with the divine spirit. As 19th century German Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch wrote, we are shown that there is no monopoly on spiritual leadership. The spiritual powers granted by God are not the privilege of any particular office or status. The lowliest of the nation shares with the highest the opportunity of being granted divine inspiration. That's a wonderful lesson. We might call it spiritual inclusiveness for us to learn ourselves. But let's return to the question of who Eldad and Medad are and what they're doing in this story. A passage in the Talmud has two explanations. Here's the first. Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught, Vayisha'aru shnei anashim b'machaneh, two men had remained in camp. That's what verse 29 had said. And so the Talmud explains, Yesh omrim b'kalpei nishtayaru. Some say they remained in the box. The late Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz explains, this means their names remained excluded from the lots in the box. Huh? What box? What lots? Fortunately, the Talmud then presents a braita, a rabbinic explanation. Moses is told to gather 70 elders. How should I do it? Moses wonders. If I choose 6 from each of the 12 tribes, I'll have 72. But I've been mandated to choose 70 elders, so I'll have 2 too many. If I choose 5 elders from each tribe, then I'll have 60 elders. I'll have 10 too few. If I choose 6 from most tribes, but 5 from some tribes, I'll bring about jealousy among the tribes, and I certainly don't want to be responsible for that. So what, according to the Talmud, did Moses do? He selected 6 from each tribe, 72 elders. He took 72 lots. Remember the lots from the Purim story? Well, this Talmudic story has lots as well. He took 72 lots, probably stones, and wrote the word zakein, elder, on 70 of them, leaving 2 of them blank. Then he put the lots in a box, and he invited each of the 72 chosen candidates to come and draw their lot from the box. When a candidate drew a lot that said zakein, elder, on it, Moses would say to that candidate, Kvar kidashcha shamayim, heaven has already sanctified you. To the 2 who drew blank lots, he would say, Hamakom lo chafetz b'cha, the Almighty doesn't want you. At least the Almighty doesn't want you for this task. Ani ma'aseh lecha, what can I do for you? So according to this explanation, there had been a lottery. 72 candidates, 6 from each tribe, for 70 positions. Moses arranged a little sleight of hand, perhaps to give the impression that there was something miraculous about choosing 70 elders from the 72 candidates. Eldad and Medad had been among the 72 candidates. That's why the Torah says that they were among the recorded, but they didn't make the final cut. But then, perhaps illegitimately, they claimed some of the divine spirit, and Moses responded with his graciousness and inclusiveness. But then the Talmud presents a second explanation, and I want to share that whole explanation with you. This explanation also begins by quoting part of verse 26. Vayisha'aru shnei anashim b'machaneh. 2 men had remained in the camp. Rabbi Shimon omer, b'machaneh nishtayaru. Rabbi Shimon said, they remained in the camp. I can almost hear Rabbi Shimon's frustration with the sages in their explanation. They remained in the camp. That means that their names remained in the box in the camp. Rabbi Shimon doesn't like that explanation. Vayisharu shnei anashim b'machaneh, 2 men had remained in the camp, means 2 men remained in the camp. Rabbi Shimon goes on. B'sha'ah she'amar lo hakadosh baruch hu leMoshe, at the time that the Holy Blessed One said to Moses, Efsali shiv'im ish, gather for me 70, Amru Eldad u'Medad, Eldad and Medad said, Ein anu re'uyin le'ota gedulah, we are not fitting for that level of greatness. We are not worthy to be elders. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy Blessed One said, Ho'il umiyatetem atzmechem, since you have made yourselves humble, Hareni mosif gedulah al gedulatchem, I will add greatness to your greatness. Umagadullah hosif lahem, and what is the greatness that God added to them? Shahanaviim kulan nitnaba'u ufasku. It was that all of the other prophets spoke in ecstasy and then stopped. Vehem nitnaba'u velo pasku. But they spoke in ecstasy and did not stop. It was Eldad's and Medad's humility that was their greatness. They didn't seek power and status. They tried to avoid leadership. But God rewarded them with the spiritual ecstasy that was associated with the elders' transition to leadership. But for Eldad and Medad, it was a lifelong reward. So we've learned a number of important lessons from this rather complicated story. We've learned about the challenges of leadership, how complicated leadership is, and how sometimes the greatest leaders learn the lesson of sharing power. We've learned about the frustrations of leadership, how the story begins with Moses beside himself with frustration and concludes with Moses demonstrating patience and humility. We've learned about spiritual inclusiveness, Moses teaching us the lesson that spiritual intensity is not the exclusive purview of religious leaders. And we've learned Rabbi Shimon's explanation of the greatness of humility. I think there's another lesson to be learned from Moses' response in part of verse 29. Umi yitain kol am Adonai nevi'im. Would that all of Adonai's people were prophets. Ki yitain Adonai et rucho aleihem, as Adonai has placed the divine spirit upon them. I'd like to suggest that Moses is not speaking only about Eldad and Medad. He's speaking about us, and hopefully he's speaking to us. Does Moses really expect us to be prophets? Jewish tradition maintains that biblical prophecy ended in the 6th or 5th century BCE. Malachi is seen as the last of the biblical prophets. Prophecy involved God communicating to individuals, to Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the others, certainly to Moses, whom Maimonides calls the greatest of the prophets. And prophecy was central and crucial in the ancient religion of Israel. But I don't think that God operates that way anymore, and I don't think that Judaism operates that way anymore. As Judaism evolved, it moved away from classical biblical prophecy. Today, if somebody claims to be a prophet, we tend to think that either he's lying to us or perhaps deluding himself. And so in what sense does Moses' hyperbolic statement, would that all of Adonai's people were prophets, speak to us? I don't think that God speaks to us as the Bible describes God speaking to Moses or Jeremiah. But I think that God does speak to us through Jewish tradition. Potentially, God speaks to us through our Torah, through our sacred literature. Rabbi Louis Finkelstein said, "When I pray, I speak to God. When I study, God speaks to me." The challenge of our Torah study is to hear God's voice resonating in our souls. But God also speaks to us as we live the life of Torah, as we practice Judaism through our rituals, our traditions, our ethical guidelines, our liturgy. To paraphrase Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, in carrying out the words of Torah, we are ushered into the presence of spiritual meaning. Through the ecstasy of deeds, there's that word, ecstasy again. Through the ecstasy of deeds, we learn to be certain of the here-ness of God. And so perhaps the final lesson of this strange story in Parashat B'ha'alot'kha is the greatest challenge: to develop spiritual discipline, to cultivate spiritual openness, to seek moments of spiritual intensity, moments in which yitain Adonai et rucho aleinu, in which God places the divine spirit upon us. Shabbat Shalom.